It's honestly insane to me how the average American still hasn't woken up to the fact that this is the same playbook.
But you're going to have peace and you're going to have safety. You're going to have justice. You're going to have a country. You're going to have a real country. You're going to have potentially a great country. You know,
Different country, different headlines, same script. When you look at what's happening in Venezuela, and then you take a look back at Iraq and Afghanistan, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore.
At this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
This isn't chaos. It isn't incompetence. It's a system, one designed to destabilize, extract, move on, and the most dangerous part is how normal it's become. Every regime change project begins the same way, with urgency.
find fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction.
In terms of us making sure that weapons of mass destruction are not proliferating.
I take the threat very seriously. I take the fact that he develops weapons of mass destruction very seriously.
In Iraq, it was weapons of mass destruction, an imminent threat that demanded immediate action. In Afghanistan, it was terrorism, a narrative that framed the country itself as permanent danger. In Venezuela, the language changes, but the function doesn't. Now it's humanitarian collapse, starvation, dictatorship. You're told something must be done now. And once urgency is established, patience becomes immoral, diplomacy becomes weakness, questioning becomes complicity. That framing removes alternatives before you even get a chance to consider them. The next step is simplification. Complex societies get collapsed into a single villain. Iraq became Saddam Hussein. Afghanistan became the Taliban. Venezuela becomes Nicolas Maduro, with Hugo Chavez always hovering in the background. Once a country is reduced to a villain, punishment stops looking like punishment. Sanctions, isolation, economic strangulation, these get framed as consequences, not violence. And the people caught in the middle disappear from the story completely. Sanctions are sold as an ethical alternative to war. But in reality, they function like siege warfare. They collapse currencies. They restrict food and medicine. They hollow out infrastructure. And then here's the trick. The suffering they cause is pointed to as proof that the government has failed. Pressure creates collapse. Collapse is blamed on leadership. That blame justifies more pressure. Because sanctions don't look violent, they're treated as humane. No explosions, no body counts, just a slow and quiet destruction. And Americans need to understand something clearly. The cost of these wars doesn't stay overseas. We've seen what Iraq and Afghanistan did to civilians, but we've also seen what they did to our own people. Thousands of U.S. service members come home with amputations, traumatic brain injuries, PTSD. Some wounds were visible and many weren't. VA-linked studies estimate that roughly 11 through 20% of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans experienced PTSD, and traumatic brain injury became so common it's often called a signature injury of these wars.
Some of us killed innocents. Some of us helped in continuing these wars from home. Some of us watch our friends die. Some of us are not here because we took our own lives.
Deployed in support of Operation Enduring Freedom, and I want to tell the folks behind us in these enclosed walls where they build more policies based on lies and fear that we no longer stand for them, we no longer...
And when many of them came home, what they ran into wasn't care, it was bureaucracy. Delayed appointments, denied claims, systems that move slower than their suffering. We've had scandals, investigations, admissions of failure, and layered on top of that was the opiate crisis. Pain management turned into dependence. Dependence turned into addiction. Addiction turned into funerals.
Suicides among veterans have reached epidemic proportions. Now the search for solutions continues.
Today, veteran suicide remains one of the most damning indictments of the entire system, an average of over 17 veteran suicides per day. So when people talk about these wars like they were just foreign policy, no, this is domestic policy too, because the trauma comes home. And it always lands hardest on the people who thought they were doing the right thing.
When I was 19, I saw this National Guard commercial where this National Guardsman is driving a tank and the tank jumps over a berm. And when I enlisted, I went into tanks and I realized that if you did that with a tank, the tank would break. You see this on the commercial, and then at the end of the commercial, it says you could still be home in time for dinner, and they show the guy eating dinner with his family. But you didn't really think of that when you sent him to Iraq. He's not going to be home in time for dinner. Someone won't come home at all.
Most people think propaganda means lying. That's not usually how it works. What actually misleads people is framing, repetition, and authority, the legacy media. During the run-up of the Iraq War, major U.S. news networks repeated claims of weapons of mass destruction with little scrutiny. Anchors echoed intelligence claims. Panels reinforced certainty. Dissenting voices were sidelined. And we now know conclusively, that those claims were false. Yet the same institutions are treated as credible narrators today. No reckoning, no accountability, just collective amnesia. This isn't theory, this is well-documented history. You can roll the footage. Colin Powell at the UN, holding diagrams of satellite images asserting Iraq had mobile biological weapons labs, a claim he later called a blot on his record. Dick Cheney, repeatedly linking Iraq to terrorism despite intelligence agencies saying the evidence didn't support it. And Donald Rumsfeld, using vague language and rhetorical fog to turn uncertainty into authority. These weren't mistakes, they were narrative management. And now today, there's another layer. We have an entire ecosystem of independent media figures, podcasters, streamers, commentators, people who represent themselves as left, right, truth tellers, centrists, as people just asking questions. They position themselves as alternatives to the corporate news, and that's where people drop their guard. But independence doesn't automatically mean integrity. Some of these same figures weren't neutral leading up to the election of Donald Trump. They weren't just having conversations, they were confidently wrong, amplifying distortions, helping shape an environment built on misinformation. And now that the consequences are impossible to ignore, a quiet rebrand. Suddenly they're not political voices anymore. Now they're entertainment podcasters. Now it's jokes, vibes, and plausible deniability. That's not growth, that's cowardice. It's an attempt to keep the influence without owning any of the responsibility or damage. The deception of today doesn't even look like authority. It looks like authenticity. A mic, a casual tone, long-form conversations. But the incentives haven't changed. Attention is currency. Outrage drives engagement. War drives views. And when geopolitics becomes content, human suffering becomes background noise. Not because everyone involved is evil, but because the system rewards heat, not truth. And here's the most effective lie of all. You're told there are only two options, that government or us. Negotiation gets dismissed as weakness. Non-intervention is framed as cruelty. Questioning the premise gets you labeled as apologetic for tyranny. In closing, the parallel between Venezuela, Iraq, and Afghanistan isn't that they're third world shithole countries. It's that the United States is using the same method. Manufacture urgency, simplify villains, strangle economies, control the narrative, and then move on, leaving civilians abroad and veterans at home to deal with the wreckage. Once you see the script, you stop reacting emotionally to the headlines and start asking the questions that really matter. Who benefits from all this? Who's paying for all this? And who's going to get rich? Because it's never the people being helped.
It doesn't mean anything. Bob Sneal died for these medals. Lieutenant Pomerol died so I got a medal. Sergeant John died so I got a medal. I got a Silver Star, Purple Heart, Army Commendation Medal, 8 air medals, National Defense, and the rest of this garbage. It doesn't mean a thing.